Hello everyone, I'm Laura Nelkin. I'm a knitwear designer. I live in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region, and I love knitting so much that I started knitting with LED fairy lights. I'm really excited to share my latest project with you. It is called Starry Light, and it is knit from the center out with US size 17 needles and a 66-foot strand of LED fairy lights. After you've knit your whole star, you end up taking all of your live stitches and putting them onto a piece of wire and finger blocking them into place. Knitting with wire is very different than knitting with wool because it is not elastic. So one of the things I'll be teaching you in this video is like tips and tricks and ways that you can find your groove for knitting with wire, so you find the joy in it basically instead of being frustrated by the project. Once you've knit your Starry Light, you can hang it in your window. You can buy fairy lights that are indoor, fairy lights that are outdoor, fairy lights that are both. We have one hanging outside on a tree in the wintertime, and it kind of lights the way home for people. It looks so magical and sweet, and I'm excited to see where everybody hangs their Starry Lights. So let's jump right in and let me show you what you're going to need to knit your own Starry Light. Okay, the first thing that you're gonna need, which is pretty obvious, is a 66-foot strand of LED fairy lights. These come in a variety of ways. They're made by a variety of manufacturers. As I said earlier, some are designed for indoor, some are designed for outdoor, some are battery operated, some plug in with a USB plug. A lot have remote controls, so you can decide how bright or dim you want them, and if you want them to do like fun disco moves as well. That could be pretty fun to play with. The next thing that you're going to need are some US size 17 needles. You'll use double pointed needles, and then if you have them available, you'll probably really enjoy also using a 24-inch circular needle for when you have more stitches on your needles. You'll also need a few big stitch markers. You definitely need 3. You could use up to 6 of those. And then for the last step, you'll need some 15 to 17 gauge silver wire, and then also a pair of pliers for cutting that wire. So that's everything that you need to knit Starry Light. And before I cast on with you, I just want to share a few things to help you have success. Okay, so I feel like in this section, you get to learn from my mistakes. One of the biggest mistakes I made on the first or second Starry Light that I knit is I didn't plug in my lights to make sure that they worked before I started knitting them. So the first thing you should do when you get your strand of lights is plug it in and make sure that it lights up and it works. And then you have to promise me this, before you start knitting, as intriguing it would be to knit with something that's plugged in, please unplug it while you're knitting. I just feel like that's a safer choice for knitting. So unplug your lights once you know that they work. You are going to be knitting from the end opposite of the plug when you go to cast on for your lights. And the other thing that is pretty important is as you start to knit, and I'll show you this as the wire is on my needles, you need to make sure that you wrap your wire around the full circumference of your needle, not just the tip. You need to make your stitches as big as possible, and we'll go over that as we're knitting. Another thing that it's important for you to know is that as you pull your wire off of your coil, it might start to get really funky and kind of tangle up on itself. So what I do before I knit every round is I kind of loosen a few feet of wire and make sure that it doesn't have any tangles of it. And I leave the rest of my wire sitting in like a bowl or something that's containing it. But it becomes a hot mess very quickly if you don't kind of keep it under control. If you want and you have an extra spool or a can or something, you could take your wire and wind it carefully around a spool or a can before you get started. Just remember that you're working from the end that doesn't plug in first, so make sure not to like start winding from that side of your cord. So that's everything I can think of for now for tips and tricks. As we jump into knitting, there are definitely a few other things that I'm going to show you. All right, it's time to cast on for your Starry Light. And the first thing that you're going to be doing is working a circular cast on. This is a cast on that I've used with shawls that are worked from the center out, with hats that are worked from the top down. I've used it in blankets before to start working squares from the center out. It's a cast on that I love, that is not hard to do once you get the hang of it. So the first thing you're gonna do is take that end of your light that does not have the plug or charger attached to it, and you're gonna go ahead and make an overhand knot so that the tail of your, I was about to call it yarn, it's wire, right, is hanging down to the right, and you have like about an inch, inch and a half of tail. And then you've got a nice circle that's not too big, make it about like an inch and a half or so, and that would be the diameter right there. And then have the rest of your wire going off to the left, right, that. And now you're gonna grab one double pointed needle to start, and you're gonna come underneath your working wire right there. So now that's one stitch on the needles. And I'm gonna reach inside this circle, and I'm gonna grab another strand of wire and pull it up. And now I have 2 strands of wire on the needle. Now I'm gonna make a yarn over that needle. It's kind of funny to call it a yarn over. Let's call it a wire over. And now I just came up with that. Now I'm gonna go inside, grab another strand of wire. So I've got 4 stitches on the needle, and then one more wire over, and then the last stitch onto the needle. And you'll see that you want to really make sure that you're going around the circumference, and you can kind of pull up a little bit right there. What's nice here is when you get to the end of your star, you'll be able to use this tail to kind of tighten up the center of your star. It's not hard to do, so don't worry too much if that's kind of big right now. If it's bugging you, if yours feels too big, now would be the time that you would undo this and try again. And the more you do it, the easier it will get. So now that we've got that on there, the next step for us to do is the setup row. Okay, I'm all ready to work the setup row with you. I have my circular cast on my needle right here, and the first thing that I'm going to do is slide these stitches all the way down to the other end of my double pointed needle, and I'm gonna kind of bring my wire across the back of my work, ready to work that first stitch. And what we're doing on this setup row is setting up the 6 points of our Starry Light. So I am going to be working a knit one for this first stitch. And remember, the big trick is to kind of pull up that wire so it's over the needle. It's not going to feel easy and like normal knitting, but your hands will get used to it. And then I jump that stitch off the needle, and now I'm going to make a yarn over on my needle. So I have 2 stitches on my right hand needle. And I'm going to take a marker A, and that marker is going to signify the beginning of the round to me. And I'm going to put that onto my right hand needle. And now I'm going to go into the next stitch on my left hand needle, wrap the yarn around, pull it through, and make another yarn over. And that is everything that goes onto the first needle. So now I'm going to grab another needle, and I'm going to knit 1 yarn over, place a marker, and then knit 1 yarn over. If your stitches are too tight, I might have pulled these up too tight when I was doing this circular cast on. Maybe don't pull up like I did if you start to have a problem there. But I can get my needle in. And I am going to wrap the yarn around and pull it through, and then make a yarn over. And then I am going to put a stitch marker on there, and then I am going to knit 1, and I'm going to make a yarn over, and then I'm going to do that 1 more time. But before I go further, if you start to see your yarn kind of tangling up with each other, sorry, I keep saying yarn and I mean to say wire, just kind of release some a little bit. And actually, I'm really glad that that just happened, because this is going to happen all the time for you. Sometimes one of your double pointed needles is going to fall out of your stitches, but this is wire, and those stitches are not going anywhere. So if your needle falls out, don't freak out. to stick your needle back in. You could probably not have a needle on your stitches part of the time and you'll still be fine. So now I'm at the last needle, and what I'm gonna do actually is grab one more double pointed needle. I'm going to knit one, yarn over. I am going to slide a stitch marker on, and I am going to knit one, yarn over. And now I have an octopus on my needles. So I've worked the setup row, and I just want to kind of like lay this out so you guys can really see what's happening here, even though it's a little crazy looking. So what's happening here for my 6-pointed star is I have 1 point here and 1 point here on needle 1, and then needle 2 has 2 points, and needle 3 has 2 points. Just make sure on needle 3 that you have that yarn over for the last stitch if it falls off. I just saw that mine had. So I'm gonna resist temptation for kind of tightening up the center right now, but that's my tail right there that I'm gonna use for tightening up the center. So now I'm ready to join into the round and start knitting with round 1. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, I'm joining into the round for round 1, and I'm gonna work knit 1, yarn over 6 times. I'm sorry, I'm looking down at my paper to make sure I tell you things correctly. At the end of round 1, you're gonna have 3 stitches per section and then 18 stitches total. So I'm gonna go into that first stitch. I'm gonna grab my wire and wrap it around. And remember, you really wanna wrap around the widest part of your needle to make your stitch nice and big. And then I'm gonna make a yarn over, and I'm going to knit that stitch again. The first one of these I knit was hard. The second one was easier. The third was fast. I think this is probably like my 6th or 7th right now, and I believe that everybody has asked me for these for the holidays, so I anticipate that I'll be knitting a few more of them. So I just finished needle 1, where I was knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, and then knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, and I'm just slipping that marker when I come to it. Remember, as you need more wire, just go down to your spool of wire and grab some more. So now I'm on needle 2, and I'm going to knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, and I'm going to slip that marker, and then I'm going to knit 1, yarn over, knit 1. Now, what I did not say earlier is that this is a companion video for Starry Light, so you will need to have the pattern to follow along with it. I'm on needle 3, and I'm going to knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, and slip that, and then knit 1, yarn over, knit 1. And we have just finished round 1, and you can kind of see things are really starting to take shape. Now is when, if you just can't help yourself and it's time to kind of pull up that center a little bit, do that carefully so you don't break your wire, and then you'll just be able to weave this end in. I'm just gonna kind of curl it up right now because it's bugging me, just to kind of get it out of the way. But you can kind of tidy up the center once you're done with round 1. So round 2 is very similar to round 1. You're working a knit 1, yarn over twice, knit 1, and you're working that all the way around. You'll end up with 5 stitches in each section and 30 stitches total on your needles. And then come back to me for round 3 because I want to show you how to do that center double decrease, because it is not as easy when you're working with wire as when you're working with wool. Okay, I'm on round 3 on my needles, and what's new in round 3 is a CDD, which is a center double decrease, which is a decrease I use often in lace designs, and it might be new to some of you. So I'll go over it in detail, but there's one thing you will need to do when you're working it in wire that you would not be doing if you're working it in wool. So I am on the first needle of round 3, and I'm going to knit 1, yarn over, and then the next stitch is a center double decrease. So what I'm going to do is take the first 2 stitches and slip them together knitwise to my right hand needle, and then I'm going to knit the next stitch, and then I need to take these 2 stitches that I just slipped and lift them over the stitch I just knit. It will not work to lift them with your knitting needle. You'll want to do it with your fingers, and then it's a pretty easy maneuver. I'm gonna show you that one more time on this needle. So I'm just finishing up this section, which is a yarn over, knit 1, and then I'm gonna ask this needle, because it's wire and I can pretty much tell things what to do, I'm gonna ask him to come back there so you guys can see this more easily. Thank you, needle. So I'm going to knit 1 and yarn over. And then my next step is a center double decrease. So I'm gonna slip these 2 stitches. I'm just gonna kind of come down on my needle tip, slip them over knitwise onto the right hand needle. And then I am going to knit 1, and then I'm going to pass those 2 slip stitches over, but it is much easier to just grab them with my fingers and bring them up and over. Use your fingers when you're knitting this star. It's definitely going to help you. And then I'm going to yarn over, knit 1, and I'm ready to go on to the second needle. So I'm just going to continue doing that around and following the pattern through round 8. At some point, you are going to find that you have a lot of stitches on your double pointed needles. If you have extra double pointed needles, you could split things up so that you have 1 point on every double pointed needle. If you have a 24-inch circular needle, you could, when your stitches, I think it's at around round 4 or 5, you might find that you want to switch over to your 24-inch circular needle. It might be after round 5 that you find it comfortable to do that. I've actually knit more than one of these stars, just staying on double pointed needles and kind of cramming the stitches together as I need to so that they're not falling off the ends. Remember, if they fall off the ends, they're not going anywhere. You're going to be able to get them right off the needle. One of my friends who test knit this ended up just taking her extra stitches and putting them onto a spare circular needle that wasn't quite a size 17, but then using the double points for knitting so that her stitches didn't get smaller. So there's a few tricks you can do. I wouldn't necessarily run out and buy a 24-inch size 17 circular needle. You might not have many uses for that, but if you already have one lying around, it will be helpful when you get to around round 4 or 5. So once you're done and you make it through round 8, I want to show you what your star looks like. This is what your star looks like after the end of round 8. What I've done after I finished round 8 is I took a 48-inch strand of 15 or 17 gauge wire, something that's flexible and easy to move, and I threaded it through all the live stitches on my needle, and I've kind of got these big ends of wire hanging out the end. This looks nothing like a star at this point. It's like you knit a blob. And if you don't follow the next step, you're gonna kind of be like, I had one of those Pinterest fails where my star didn't come out like her star. A really important step after you get all of those stitches onto the wire is to finger block and massage this into a star. The biggest trick, if you look at it, and it's a little easier to see on a finished knit star, is that the points have pairs of knit stitches and the kind of ditches of your star have the center double decreases. So if you look at your blob, there's really no other word for your Starry Light at this point. I can see that I've got a center double decrease line right there and right there. So this is going to be the point up here. And I'll kind of pull my wire out to start really giving room for the stars, knowing that that's going to be a point right there. That's going to be a point right there. That's going to be a point right there. That's going to be a point. And let's see, that's going to be a point. We've got a point right there, right? Yep. So still not totally looking like a star, but you can kind of start to see it come into shape. You'll notice if one end of your wire gets kind of short, you might want to like weave through a little bit of the end that you have more wire on, because it's going to start really kind of sucking up the wire as you get those points longer. And you're just going to continue on like that, kind of pulling that up, pulling it out. The longer you do this, the more of a star you end up having. So after you spend time with this step, and you can kind of pull the wire up and around as you need to, it'll look more and more like a star. So here's one that's a little bit more blocked out, just to give you an idea. I can keep shaping it by pulling on the points and pulling on the wire and getting that shape in. It still doesn't look perfect, and it's not supposed to. You knit with wire. This is not elastic. It's not easy to work with. But if you take something where you're like, I think I've got a star shape, and you plug it in now and light it up, you'll see that it looks just like a star. Although looking at it flat, it's still kind of the idea of a star at this point. So spend time with this step and just kind of really get into the massage. Who doesn't love a good massage, right? It's spa time for your Starry Light. That's what I call this finishing step. I am so excited to see all of your Starry Lights. Just to be clear, this is a companion video. You will need the pattern to follow along and make a Starry Light. I've given you links to that below. If you have any questions, I am more than happy to help you. You can leave them in this video. You can leave those questions in my Facebook group, in my Ravelry group, wherever you are the most comfortable knitting along with us. We're going to be very happy to support you and see your Starry Light show up. I'm kind of interested to see if somebody ends up like covering a whole tree with them. If you are not subscribed to my channel, I would absolutely love if you would do that. You can hit the like button below. Comments always help other people know what you think about my videos. If you're not signed up for my email list, that is a fun list to be on. I send out emails as the spirit moves me. I like to send them out once a week, but I like knitting too, so that doesn't always happen. Thank you so much. I hope you find light and joy this holiday season, whatever holiday you celebrate. I'm just really all about a festival of lights. Happy star knitting.